Want to welcome you back to our breaking news coverage here on WFAA News at 4 p.m. and of course our entire audience on WFAA Plus this afternoon as well. I'm Jason Wheeler. Let's get right to that breaking news for anyone just now joining us. Today a jury found Carmelo Anthony guilty of murder in the Frisco track meet stabbing trial. That decision was made just before 2 o'clock this afternoon. The case is right now in the sentencing phase. In fact, I have an update for you on that here in just a second. Let's show you this live look from our chopper of the crowd outside the courthouse. It is actually hard to see them. People have taken shelter from that blazing June sun under the trees there at the courthouse. Folks have been gathering every day of this trial, which has gone on now for almost a week. Some of them are from out of town. Some of them are high school students. This case has drawn a lot of interest, not just here locally, but it has been making headlines all across the country. It has had a very emotional impact, to say the least. In April of 2025, Anthony, who was a student at Frisco Centennial High School, was arrested and charged for the stabbing death of Austin Metcalf, who was an athlete at Memorial High School. That stabbing taking place on April 2nd at a high school track meet at Kirkendall Stadium. Anthony was charged with murder by the Collin County District Attorney. Prosecutors had the burden of proof to show that he knew that he was causing the death of Austin Metcalf. And during a 7-day trial, the state said that's exactly what happened. The defense, though, countered that Anthony was just acting to protect himself. He was 17 years old at the time. That is considered an adult under Texas law. There has been a lot of question about, why wasn't this a capital murder case? Why wasn't the death penalty a possibility here? This case, because of the circumstances of it, was not eligible to be a death penalty case or a capital murder case. And so in this case, the jury is able to consider 5 to 99 years in prison for that guilty verdict. And the defense, as we have been telling you here this afternoon, is pushing for something in the range of 2 to 20 years because they have made the argument to the jury that this was a crime of passion, that he didn't have a cool head when all of this transpired. I can tell you from Jobin Puneker, who is in the courtroom and has been in the courtroom every day of this trial and sending out live updates that we have been including on a blog on our website, WFAA.com. Jobin is there in the courtroom right now. He says that the defense has just wrapped up its presentation to the jury of closing arguments in the sentencing phase. The prosecution went first. They've already wrapped up. So, as we understand it now, the jury has heard everything that they're going to hear from both sides and is about to begin deliberating punishment for Carmelo Anthony. I can tell you that when the defense was up, they told the jury, which will go consider punishment now, they said, "I cannot tell you what the right verdict is." Jobin tells us that Carmelo Anthony was crying while listening to the closing statements there. The state, the prosecution here, didn't recommend a range. They were pretty nebulous about it. They just said, follow your heart and follow the law. Jobin tells us that the defense spent most of each side was allotted 20 minutes. He says the defense spent most of its time talking about the whole crime of passion and basically saying that doesn't mean that, we are blaming the victims here. When he says that, this was self-defense, we're not blaming the victims here. This was a crime of passion. It was sudden passion, which means that a decision is made in the heat of the moment, which is different than a decision you would make when you are cool and collected. Then, both sides, finished up here, but they say that the defense, Jobin tells us the defense closed by saying there are people on both sides whose lives have been irrevocably changed. And I think both sides would agree to that in this case. Jobin had told us earlier that when the verdict came down, there was no emotion being expressed there in the courtroom like you sometimes see, depending on which side, has won in court and which side has lost. He says that everyone on both sides seemed very somber and pointed out that one of our legal experts had said earlier this week that no one wins here. This is hard, of course, for both families. Senior crime and justice reporter Rebecca Lopez and investigative reporter Tanya Iser are still at the courthouse with us this afternoon, along with attorney Keith Harris, who is giving us analysis this afternoon. So it looks like this is headed to the jury now to be able to decide punishment in this case. We don't know how long that will take. I wanted to ask the three of you, though, going into this trial, there's been so much buildup about this. We've had, people who have been agitating from the outside, which is why we have so much, security there at that courthouse, sort of unprecedented because of this case. Were you all surprised by the fact that it went as quickly as it did and that the jury didn't take that long today, less than 3 hours to come to a decision here? But this trial itself wrapped up quickly too, it seemed.
I was very surprised, Jason. I'm used to these types of trials at least lasting a complete 2 weeks. We were expecting this trial to go even into Saturday, is what the judge had initially told us. We were all prepared to work until then, but clearly they moved very quickly. The judge did want them to streamline. Obviously, they were going to get all their evidence in, but then I was very surprised at how quickly the jury came back, considering that they were considering not just the charge of murder, but also manslaughter and then the self-defense. And typically you see something like that last a little bit longer. But as soon as they came back, and Tanya, you can talk a little bit about this. We have covered a lot of trials. As soon as they came back so quickly, I told Tanya they have found him guilty of murder. Usually when it comes back that quickly, the jury was pretty convinced, and it didn't take them probably maybe 1 or 2 votes for them to render this verdict.
Oh, we both looked at each other and we said,
yeah, murder.
Because we, right before the verdict came back, we were talking about, we were waiting for, maybe they'll have questions, maybe they'll ask to look at certain evidence, maybe they'll ask to look at, body cam video or surveillance video or any of that kind of stuff. And then when the word came that there was a verdict, you're like, okay, they're not, because, a lot of times in a case like this, we sometimes see it where they'll kind of know what they want to do, but they'll sleep on it and then come back. That didn't happen here.
And they didn't ask any questions either. Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised at the time period of the verdict. I thought that they might take it a little bit longer, deliberate. You see questions from jurors a lot. And so the fact that they didn't have any questions, to me, it just says that I think that they were pretty clear in what they were going to decide. I mean, I think that they didn't have any issues or struggling answering questions as they went through the charge. And so I think that that's probably why they were able to come back so quickly. And like Tanya said, usually fast verdicts aren't good for the defense. And I could tell when they walked in and they weren't looking at the defense as they were going to their chairs, I knew that it definitely probably wasn't good for the defense.
And Jason, Bill Wertzke is a very accomplished, very seasoned prosecutor, and all our legal experts said he tried a very good case. And so this jury did not have a lot of issues. They immediately rendered this verdict and very quickly.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring him up because we got an update from Jobin Puneker in this continuing blog that he's been sending us, and he says that the prosecutor here punched holes in the argument that the defense is making that this was a crime of sudden passion. He says that sudden passion does not fit here. It doesn't apply when the murderer is the provoker, and he's implying that that's what happened in this case. He says that mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. And then he was showing photos of Austin Metcalf, the victim in this case, as well as Hunter Metcalf, his twin brother. He was showing that to the jury, and the prosecution was saying, we've spent too much time talking about Carmelo Anthony, the defendant who's been found guilty here. We haven't spent enough time talking about Austin Metcalf. And then the prosecutor pointed to the Metcalf family and said, there were many life sentences handed out and pointed out different members of the family. So some really impactful statements being made there to the jury in those closing arguments before they go and decide punishment. I'd like to just ask our expert here on the panel this afternoon, how important, how crucial, the jury already knows all of the different facts of the case. They've already come to their decision. How crucial are these statements, each side given 20 minutes? How crucial are those in determining where a jury lands as far as punishment goes?
Well, just from what you said with what Jobin had blogged out about Worski's closing arguments, really powerful. Just you saying it, not hearing it from him, it is what the state wants to do. They want to bring it back to Austin. They've spent so much time talking about Carmelo, about his rights, about his right to a fair trial, about does he have self-defense, and all these things that go as to him that Bill, and that's what you exactly want to do in punishment. You want to bring it right back to what it's about. You can't forget that there's a victim in here. You can't forget all the lives that were affected by Mr. Anthony's actions, the family, and they're not going to get to have their loved one. And so I think really a way to land it, to land the plane, to leave it with the jury, so that's the last thing they're going to hear, and then they're going to go discuss with amongst themselves on the proper punishment. Mm-hmm. So Bill did exactly what he had to do. And for the defense, I mean, it's a tough case for them to argue. I mean, it is. And, just because they found him guilty of murder, I know the defense fought hard. I know that they did everything that they could. I know they're very talented attorneys. So we got to give props to them as well of trying just a good, clean case as well. And we'll see kind of what the jury decides in that.
This is a case, as we were talking about. Oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask him if he thought that the fact that Carmelo Anthony was the only one that could really get up there and say, I felt like I was in fear of self-defense, and the fact that he didn't take the stand, do you think that hurt the defense?
Well, the jury's going to be instructed that they can't take into consideration the fact that Mr. Anthony didn't testify, so they can't even consider that. I don't think it necessarily hurt the defense because you can think, well, you still got the charge in, you still got sudden passion in the charge, and that would be the only thing that Mr. Anthony could have maybe added to or given more specifics of why he felt that way. But I think the evidence has been presented that at least give them an argument to make an argument to the jury on certain factors or things that they think would rise to the level of sudden passion.
We were
Jason.
talking just a few moments ago about how fast this case moved along and how quickly the jury was able to go through that guilt and innocence phase of this. Just for anyone who's keeping track, Jobin Puneker tells us that at 4:37, which is 5 minutes ago now, the jury officially began deliberating, and so the clock has started on that. And I'm probably putting the cart way out in front of the horse here in asking this, but Counselor Harris, what is the defense thinking potentially about appeal at this point, and how does that work?
Well, they will appeal, I would assume. So they have 30 days to file an appeal, and so usually what will happen is probably before they leave the courthouse today, the judge will have them put in their notice for appeal. Even if Mr. Howard and Mr. Shook don't represent him on appeal, he's at least put his notice to the court, which preserves his right to get an appeal. And whether they have to appoint an appellate attorney to represent him or he hires his own appellate attorney, but it preserves his right until whoever is going to handle it can follow the necessary paperwork with the Court of Appeals.
And Keith, talk to us about an appeal bond, how that would work and when that would come into play.
That's a great question. So he could be entitled, well, the court could consider giving him an appeal bond if the jury sentences him to 10 years or less in prison. To where if the court could set a bond where he could post a bond and he could be out on release on bond while his case is going through the appeals process. If the jury sentences him to over 10 years in prison, then he will not be able to have an appeal bond set.
Do you think that part of this appeal is going to be that the three remaining African-American jurors were not selected and they were struck by the judge and the prosecution, and then they had the protest from the defense, but were still not allowed on the panel?
Well, I definitely think that could be something that gets mentioned in the appeal. from the appellate attorney's standpoint, they're probably going to review the record. Defense, that's why they make the objections. That's why they're very clear, so that they can preserve error for appeal. If they would have never objected to those strikes, then he couldn't have gone on appeal and said, hey, the court erred in going with the state on these strikes for whatever reason based on race and everything like that. So they preserve the error so that the appellate attorney could raise that if they want to.
Jason.
All right, Rebecca Lopez, Tanya Iser, and Attorney Keith Harris, thank you so much, all of you, for the expertise, for your coverage. I know that it is a difficult situation out there. There's a lot going on, a lot of things to keep tabs on. It is a really hot afternoon. We see the people who have gathered there at the courthouse are all taking refuge under trees. And so our thanks for all of the coverage this afternoon. And of course, we'll see you all back here on the 5 o'clock news and of course on WFAA Plus as well. Again, the jury in the Carmelo Anthony case has now been deliberating for the past 8 minutes or so, and they are in the punishment phase here. We could see anything, as we understand it at this point, between 2 and 20 years or 5 and 99 years. We will, of course, be staying on top of this all the way to the very end.